My wife and better half, Tracy, is not here tonight. As you can see, I'm sitting here all alone in the office. She'll be back next week. Word is she's probably going to stop in the chat room at some point tonight. So hopefully we'll get to hear from her. But she's out of town. I miss her, and I think we're all better off with her here. But on the other side of it, I've got a lot to talk about with you tonight, and it's important. I spent a good portion of the day looking into this. So I want to spend some time on this and jump right in. This is on a subject that came out in the news about 2 weeks ago. It was reported in Yahoo News on August 1st. Yahoo News, go figure. They actually came up with something this time. And it's on a topic that got a little bit of mainstream attention and a little bit of attention in the alternative news media, but in my opinion, not really enough. And in my view also, not a whole lot of analysis. So what I've decided to do is really dig into this document and give my go at it and go over this with you. And I'm talking about a piece that was, I'm going to share the screen here with you. I've got this right here. I'm going to be doing this all of this program, sharing the screen with you. By the way, you'll notice I'm not using the old Google Hangouts. That's gone. I really want to thank Mike Moriarty for showing me StreamYard. That's what the software I'm using here, and this allows me to keep my little picture within a picture while I show you the screen. I'm not that tech savvy with a lot of this stuff, so this for me is a big step up. The other thing I just want to say in preface to everything that's going to follow is this subject is one of these borderline subjects that I occasionally get taken into the YouTube principal office for when I talk about it. And I am going to really work very hard because I want to treat this subject in a balanced and non-incendiary way. This is a very important piece of information for any of us who believe in freedom of inquiry within a free society. So, you know, the rules for YouTube, what they allow, what they don't allow is an ever-moving goalpost. You never really know week to week what's on the good list and what's on the bad list with YouTube. So there's been a number of times in the past where I've done programs that I felt were very, very responsible, dealing with topics that are important, and yet many times YouTube has decided not to. They've never taken my videos down, but they love to demonetize. And look, it's not the end of the world if they want to demonetize. That's their right, I suppose. But it makes it very difficult for content creators to keep doing this when YouTube continues to change the rules of what they allow and what they don't allow. You know, they are the ultimate finger-wagging schoolmarm these days, telling people what's safe for them to believe and what's not safe for them to believe and so forth. So for this particular program, I'm taking this as a kind of test. I want to see actually how they respond to this. And by the way, after this is done, this video is done, I'm going to put in the description the results of this, how YouTube has treated this video. Do they demonetize? Do they not? And so forth. So we'll see. All right. So anyway, the story that I want to talk about and the analysis I want to do with you tonight is, this is a headline right here. So this is from Yahoo News, August 1st. And it just says exclusive. FBI document warns conspiracy theories are a new domestic terrorism threat. I'm sure a lot of you heard about this. This has been out now for 2 weeks. And I read the article when it first came out. It was very distressing to me. I want to talk about this. Now, one thing I want to try to do is avoid excessive amounts of opinionating on this subject. It's going to be unavoidable for me, but I also really want to do this right and to do this responsibly for you. So let's move ahead. By the way, I've got the document here for you, and I'm going to be showing you quite a bit of it. So this is page 1 of the document, at least most of it. And you can go to the link. The Yahoo News link is below, and then at the very bottom, you can get to the FBI document itself. This is an intelligence bulletin, and it's at Scribd. And probably the easiest way for you to do it is just Google or use any other search engine, DuckDuckGo, whatever. Type in Scribd and the FBI intelligence bulletin. You'll probably find it easily. Or just type in all of those numbers there. So the title of this is Anti-Government Identity Bias and Fringe Political Conspiracy Theories Very Likely Motivate Some Domestic Extremists to Commit Criminal, Sometimes Violent Activity. That's the rather long title of this report. So again, I want to go over some of this here with you. Here we go. Now, again, I will encourage you, because I haven't seen any analyst that's actually gone into this document. Maybe they haven't, I've just missed it. But I will encourage you to go to the Scribd website and take this document down. But I'm going to go over what I feel are the most important highlights, at least the things that struck me as most significant. So again, this is an FBI report. It's from May 30th, by the way, of this year, 2019. And the analyst here is essentially stating that some conspiracy theories, certain conspiracy theory narratives tacitly support or legitimize violent action. And then it goes on here. The FBI assesses these conspiracy theories very likely will emerge, spread, and evolve in the modern information marketplace, occasionally driving both groups and individual extremists to carry out criminal or violent acts. So that sounds very, very dangerous, very threatening. And I will simply add, in going through the news and videos that are available on this, there's quite a few, particularly smaller alternative type media that are very critical of all of this. But there's a really large number of mainstream, or at least more mainstream oriented presentations that are very sympathetic to what the FBI is doing here, and they really believe it's a good thing to be cracking down on these extremists. Now, the way that the news media portray this as it's essentially dealing with white supremacists, that's, I think, really the number one talking point that you hear with this document, and indeed, that is part of what's going on here. But there's a lot of other things going on in this document that are extremely important I want to go over. So they, whoops, let me just fix that light there. Beg your pardon. Okay, it looks like I lost a light. I'll have to fix that later. My goodness. All right. So it continues and says indicators, they feel very confident in their assessment of how these conspiracy theories are going to be dangerous, potentially violent, and so forth. And then they say something really quite interesting, and I haven't heard discussed anywhere else in any other source here. And it's very simply that they say indicators that may lead to revised judgments or cause a change in the confidence level associated with this assessment. So they're saying, here's two things that are going to lead us to revise our judgment that these conspiracy theories are probable, or that these conspiracy theories are probably likely to lead to violence or terrorism. First, a lack of conspiracy-driven criminal or violent activity in the near to long term. Okay, so just stop right there. So what they're saying, as far as I can read this, is we'll change our judgment on our confidence level of this if nothing happens in the near or long term. So, well, that's great to know that the FBI is at least that amenable to actual data and actual facts as they occur. That just seems like a pretty bare bones sort of a thing there. And then here's the second thing, which is actually quite interesting. Significant efforts by major social media companies and websites to remove, regulate, or counter potentially harmful conspiratorial content. So I just want to repeat this again. So this is something that will allow the FBI to revise its judgment in the future if significant efforts are made by major social media companies and websites to remove, regulate, or counter potentially harmful conspiratorial content. My take on this, and this is not a radical take whatsoever, is they're basically tacitly and fairly explicitly asking major social media companies to regulate and remove and counter this conspiratorial content. So I think this is a request for soft banning and more censorship. This is, I don't see how else one can interpret that. I want to continue onward here, and then I've got a bit more analysis for you. Anti-government, identity-based, fringe political conspiracy theories very likely to motivate. Okay, I read that. And then it goes on here. They talk about, oh yes, so how some of these domestic extremists attributed their actions to their conspiratorial beliefs. What is a conspiratorial belief? Well, we'll get to that. But what they're saying is that some of these fringe and these violent actions, the perpetrators attributed their actions to their conspiratorial beliefs. Okay, fine. They're not really particularly specific here, but then they go down. They talk about the Pizzagate and New World Order as being part of one individual's repertoire, of his intellectual repertoire, like he was going to commit a terrorist act. They got him, he didn't, but there you go. So continuing onward here, they talk about the outlook, and they mention the 2020 presidential election. And what they're saying here is that they're expecting conspiracy theories to incorporate this next major election. Surprise, surprise. So in other words, they're saying that people who do analysis of deep political activities, what we might call deep state, although deep state is a conspiratorial term now apparently, that they will incorporate the 2020 presidential election into their conspiracy theory. There's a surprise. And then I want to focus on this particular area right here. So they say another factor driving the intensity of conspiracy theorizing in the United States and the subsequent threat from conspiracy-minded extremists, and listen carefully to this, is the uncovering of real conspiracies or cover-ups involving illegal, harmful, or unconstitutional activities by government officials or leading political figures. Just wow. So what they're saying right here is, yes, a lot of these conspiracy theories are driven by actual conspiracies and cover-ups that have actually happened. So that's a little bit of a head spinner to me. And I think for many people reading this, you're thinking, wait, what? So on one hand, they're saying that these conspiracy theories are dangerous. On the other hand, right in here, embedded in this report, is an acknowledgement that these theories are at least often driven by genuine conspiracies and cover-ups. So, okay, thanks for that. They don't really go into any detail whatsoever as to what some of those genuine conspiracies are, but I will in a short while. So buckle up and we'll get into all of that. Continuing on with this document, though, I just want to get into some of the real interesting meat here in it. So I'll just highlight some of these. In the context of domestic terrorism, extremists often view the activities of alleged conspirators as an existential threat that can only be stopped through drastic or even violent means. Now, again, I just want to point out that, they haven't really defined conspiracy theory yet. They're about to, but they give a very, this is a very weak and I would say inadequate description of conspiracy theory. But what they're really saying is that there are certain conspiracy theories that appear to promote violence extremists. Are they saying that, or are they just saying that some violent extremists use certain so-called conspiracies to justify their actions that they see as an existential threat? I mean, they're not really making a very clear distinction here as to which conspiracy theories, so-called conspiracy theories, are promoting actual violence. They give a definition here. A conspiracy theory is an attempt to explain events or circumstances as the result of a group of actors working in secret to benefit themselves at the expense of others. That's a pretty good definition, actually. I mean, I've heard worse. I started writing about conspiracies, I guess you could say, 25 years ago when I began writing about UFOs. That's my thing. Some of you who subscribe to my YouTube channel know that I've written quite a bit about UFOs. Some of you who are coming across this video for the first time probably don't. So the fact is that for 25 years, I have researched very deeply the UFO phenomenon, and with an emphasis on its political overtones, the political cover-up, and so forth, as I've described it. I have believed for a very long time that the cover-up on the UFO subject is real and goes very deep and is very significant and has caused a great deal of illegality and harm to our society. That's been my judgment. You may disagree with that, but that's been my assessment for a long time, and I've given a lot of thought to this. I've done as much research as I can do on this. So, so having looked at that, I think that their definition of conspiracy theory isn't a bad one. I would only add that conspiratorial activity is actually a fundamental element of organizational behavior, particularly the higher up you go. When organizations are in competition with each other for power, wealth, and so forth, they will act in secret. They will act, with allies that they can get secretly to get what they want to get. This is what's happened the world over since the beginning of human history. So nothing unusual about that. Another couple of highlights. Some conspiracy theories point to weak circumstantial evidence, but ignore stronger evidence that would refute their claims. This is a really vague and meaningless statement. That's like saying, because everyone is imperfect, so everyone makes mistakes. So certain ideas about how the world operates are correct, other ideas are incorrect. Big deal. And it goes on, it says, consequently, they are usually at odds with official or prevailing explanations of events. That's interesting. So does that mean, the assumption here, it doesn't really take a lot to see. The assumption is that official and prevailing explanations of events are the correct one. And you hear this more and more. It's becoming more and more out in the open, that there are authoritative news sources. You hear that word authoritative quite frequently when YouTube and Facebook are talking about providing you with authoritative news. Facebook, which works hand in hand now with the Atlantic Council, and if you don't know much about the Atlantic Council, they're worth a web search. This is a NATO-based organization that is described in any sense you look at it as neoconservative, hardcore neocons. They are the go-to news source that is guiding Facebook's news strategy. And by the way, Facebook, as you probably have heard, is now in the process or trying to pay news companies for the right to put their headlines on Facebook newsfeed. And they'll probably get away with it because the news organizations are all going broke and Facebook is going to get away with it. So they're actually becoming the true source of so-called authoritative news. I don't consider that a particularly good thing, but there you go. So anyway, the fundamental assumption in this statement here is that the official and prevailing explanation of events is the good one. And they differentiate conspiracy theories from real conspiracies, which the author here says involving illegal, anti-democratic, and harmful activities by high-level government officials and political elites have been exposed in the past, and it has been argued that such plots have encouraged conspiracism in society. And yes, I think that's actually a very defensible statement, and that's actually quite true. I have myself argued for a long time that it is the criminal nature of much of our governing society and what we would call our elites that has caused a huge amount of distrust to develop among not just the people, but among scholars and researchers who delve into these types of matters, and they're naturally going to develop a distrust. So again, it's really what there's no discussion of in any of this, of course, and it's really not their intention, but there's no discussion of where is the distinction between valid conspiracy analysis, let us say, and whack job violent conspiracy theories. They don't really get into that. So I'm going to continue a few more points here. One of the things that comes through in this document is the newest important kind of new development that they want to go after, which is new conspiracy theory, is anti-government conspiracy theories. So there are other types of conspiracy theories that they discuss, but the anti-government ones are the ones that they are most concerned with nowadays, or that has really gotten their attention. And they just list 3 here. I've underlined them. So you've got the New World Order conspiracy theory. I've got quite a bit to say on that. And oh golly, I was going to show you a screenshot of that, and I never incorporate that in here, but I will talk about it. So they describe the New World Order as a group of international elites, controls governments, industry, and media organizations instigating major wars, carrying out secret stage events, and manipulating economies with the goal of establishing global rule. And they call this a dangerous conspiracy theory. I just want to point out, I was going to share this screen, but I actually neglected to insert this into the slides. I have an old book on my shelf. I've had it for years. Don't know how I got it. From 1976, called, here, let me stop sharing the screen for a second. How do I do this? I'm on the new, there we go. I have a book from 1976 by an author named Gary Allen. Again, I don't know how I got this book. It's old, called The Rockefeller Files. So it's an early conspiracy book, long before the internet. And I read it many years ago. And what's interesting in this book is in 1976, so it's a very interesting analysis of the Rockefeller dynasty, and really getting into their financial control over the world, the foundation system, and all of that. But on page 61, and I remember this very well, and I'll try to get a screenshot up here at some point in the future. I can't do it on this broadcast. But on page 61 of this little paperback book, Gary Allen, and I don't know how he got this information, he's talking about how the Rockefeller brothers, the 4 big ones, David, Winthrop, Nelson, and Lawrence, had a phrase that they used among themselves to describe the nature of the world they were trying to create for their own benefit. And the phrase was New World Order. Now, he wrote this book in 1975, published it in 1976. And he has basically spends like 1 or 2 pages discussing their take on the New World Order. And he says, this is not going to be some fun little picnic. This is their vision for controlling the whole rest of the world. So he writes this in the mid-70s. 14 years later, President George Herbert Walker Bush and his national security advisor, Brent Scowcroft, within the space of a week or 2, I think, maybe within a month, both insert that phrase in 1990 into their respective speeches. A new world order. They did this in a very positive way. And of course, nowadays, New World Order is not a positive phrase, but President Bush at that time absolutely did incorporate it and tried to talk about this New World Order in a very positive way. Now, George Herbert Walker Bush, for his entire life, was always in tight with the Rockefellers and has really always worked for them in one form or another. So I don't think that's a coincidence. Maybe it's a coincidence, but I seriously doubt it. And I really wonder, is my description of that for you just now, is that a conspiracy theory, or is that simply true? So again, the whole idea of New World Order being a conspiracy theory, no, in fact, there's genuinely strong research to support the fact that this idea of a New World Order is and has been for a very long time promoted by our greatest financial elites, the Rockefellers themselves. So, yeah, interesting. They mentioned the UN and all the UN conspiracies. I think that probably these days the UN has really taken a backseat to a lot of other conspiracy theories, in my view. I don't see it as being that critical. Maybe some people out there take it seriously. I don't really think so. And then they get into false flags, right here, down here at the bottom. Wow. So here we go. False flags. Now, this is something I've spent a lot of time researching, and they describe this in the following manner. The official story surrounding a given terrorist attack or mass shooting is a lie. The event was staged or conducted by the government to justify encroachments on civil liberties. Yeah, that's kind of accurate. That's pretty straightforward description. But what they're doing here is implicitly saying that, just by the way that they're framing it in this bulletin, that these are dangerous conspiracy theories and presumably false. And they don't say within this that they're false. And in fact, the report is really duplicitous in a lot of ways because, in several places it states that conspiracy theories are in part driven by actual genuine government conspiracies. Now, as someone who's looked into false flags in a great amount of detail, I can tell you false flags are something that is part of our world in a very, very integral way. And there's reasons. There are specific reasons why false flags, in fact, are part of our world. And I've talked about this many times, but in short, I would simply suggest to you that in an era where we are still living in ostensibly democratic societies with ostensibly democratic institutions, which in fact are not democratic, but more oligarchic than anything else, but that must keep the veneer of a democratic appearance, out there for people. But yet that doesn't change the fact that governments and powerful organizations still need to do things to get their way. And they need to, they can't just, openly invade other countries all the time. So they have to create pretext, or they have to create, all kinds of excuses, or not excuses, but justifications for what they do. And there's a very long provable history of false flags. Some of them I'll discuss in a short while. And there's a lot of false flags that we can't prove with 100%, but certainly look and act like other types of false flags that we know happen. So let me continue here. Let's see, what else are they saying? Political fringe. Oh yeah, so they talk about two specific fringe political conspiracy theories. They talk about Pizzagate and QAnon, and basically set these both up as straw men in the way that I look at this. But one thing that they actually have is very interesting. They both mention child sex trafficking in both of them as dangerous conspiracy theories. And I just think that's really great timing, guys, in the aftermath of the arrest and suicide of Jeffrey Epstein. Like, wow, if there's any time that you want to believe in that type of conspiracy theory, this is probably the time to believe in it. But according to the FBI, these are, these types of things are dangerous conspiracy theories. So this is from, I think, the Yahoo News article, and they just say here, the new focus on conspiracy theorists appears to fall under the broader category of anti-government extremism. I was just talking about this. And then a quote here, this is the first FBI product examining the threat from conspiracy-driven domestic extremists and provides a baseline for future intelligence products. So, okay, let me just stop sharing the screen there for a moment, and I'll come back to a few other things here. Now, one thing that I really feel this is important to say for proper balance is that the FBI states several times in their press release that they're not going after people just on the basis of their opinions. They say this a few times. In fact, let me just show you these couple of quotes here. So there's two of them here. In its statement, the FBI also said it can, quote, never initiate an investigation based solely on First Amendment protected activity. That's an interesting way that they put it, actually. However, First Amendment protected activity is defined, but let's continue. As with all of our investigations, they go on, the FBI can never monitor a website or a social media platform without probable cause. Well, I would just, reply that in the post-USA Patriot Act era, since 2001, that gives them quite a lot of leeway to have their way with monitoring websites. Another statement later in the article, the Yahoo article, I'll just read this here. Though the FBI document focuses on ideological motivations, FBI Director Wray, in his testimony last week, asserted that the FBI is concerned only with violence, not people's beliefs. The FBI doesn't, quote, investigate ideology no matter how repugnant, end quote, he told lawmakers. We investigate violence and any extremist ideology. When it turns to violence, we are all over it. In the first 3 quarters of this year, we've had more domestic terrorism arrests than the prior year, and it's about the same number of arrests as we have on the international terrorism side. So yeah, I mean, that's interesting that they say what they're saying here. Now, again, no one is denying that there are dangerous extremists in the United States and around the world. And by the way, they're of all political persuasions. So you get them on the right, you get them on the left. And it is a danger, and it's a real problem. One thing that I would ask you to consider, however, is how closely related extremist ideologies are to conspiracy theories. And I think this is a really weak link in the analysis. And in fact, I would say it's a nearly non-existent link. There are, in history and currently, you've had Nazis, you've had fascists, you've had communists. These are ideologically driven extremists who have and do commit violent acts. And we know this. But I would ask you to ask the question, are those extremist ideologies the product of conspiracy theories? I think the answer to that is really fundamentally no. I think that they're totally separate. Certainly in the case of Nazi and fascist ideologies, they're not driven primarily by conspiracies. They may incorporate their own ideas of conspiracies in, but those are, in my view, absolutely secondary to other types of motivations. And the same, I would say, is true of communist ideologies. They have their own dangerous extremisms, all of them. And it is, I think, no one's arguing that we shouldn't be monitoring against those and challenging them and regulating them to the extent that we decide as a society to do so. But again, to conflate those with so-called conspiracy theories is a real stretch, and there hasn't been any kind of genuine evidence provided in this FBI bulletin, or frankly, anywhere else that I have seen that justifies this type of report. So I'm going to continue to share a screen with you again. And this, I think, is the last thing that I'm quoting from the article, and then I've got a few other things I'm going to share with you. The Homeland Security official agrees that conspiracy theories, and this is how they end the article, may in fact inspire violence and be a threat, but questions what the government is going to do about it. He notes that the Department of Homeland Security, quote, nearly all, if not all, the intelligence analysts focusing on domestic extremist groups were eliminated under the Trump administration. There is no one there doing this, he says. So really, the article ends on the note of emphasizing the importance, it seems to me, of putting more money and more resources into combating extremist conspiracy theorists. So it's a real kind of support for what the FBI is trying to do here, and there you go. So if we were to go by the what the FBI is suggesting here, and really this is a tacit recommendation, let's make no mistake about it. I wonder what would have happened in, say, 1960 if some researcher analysts had been able to say, I believe the United States government is conducting covert mind control research on unwitting subjects and screwing with their heads for the rest of all time in the quest for creating the perfect, Manchurian candidate or the perfect, mind control victim. And that individual in 1960, under this type of FBI, recommendation, would be labeled as a potential domestic terrorist threat, seems to me. That's an anti-government conspiracy theory, MK Ultra, which happened to be true. Or what would someone have said in, say, 1950? If they had said, there's a lot of Nazis being brought in covertly into the United States. These are unrepentant Nazis, and it looks like the United States government somehow, one way or another, is bringing these guys in covertly. And that actually is breaking the law because we're not supposed to allow them into our country. That's illegal, which in fact it was. And that person could also be considered a dangerous anti-government extremist. And that would be Operation Paperclip, and that would not be a conspiracy theory. That would be conspiracy fact. Or what if someone in 1950, 1960, 1970 had said, looks to me in my research that the CIA has actually had its hooks into major media for many, many years and is in fact controlling the most part of what the media is reporting. It's all being managed ultimately by the CIA. And again, that's another anti-government conspiracy theory. That would be Operation Mockingbird. Absolute total fact. We can go on and on. There's a lot of these. You could say, if the year is 1953 and you're looking at the so-called, free Iranian revolution that overthrew the elected prime minister, Mossadegh, and if you had said, that's actually a CIA and British intelligence operation to bring in a bunch of Iranian thugs and killers and murderers and put them in the streets and start riots, one riot after another, and also to instigate bombings and blame it on communists, all in an effort to overthrow this regime so that the US and the Brits can get the Iranian oil again. That person would also be considered a dangerous extremist, anti-government, according to how the FBI is formulating this, and that would be Operation Ajax. That's also true. Or here's a good one. How about if it's 1962 and you tell the world, hey, some crazy guy at the Joint Chiefs of Staff is trying to get President Kennedy to sign off on having American commercial airliners crash into American buildings and blame it on Cubans, allowing us to start a war with Cuba. You'd be considered a very dangerous anti-government extremist, and yet you would be telling the truth because that would be describing Operation North Woods, which thankfully did not happen. John F. Kennedy had the common good sense to say, no, we're not going to do that. Get out of my office. And on and on and on. Bombings in Europe done by Operation Gladio, a NATO/CIA operation through the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s and probably beyond. And Gladio is only the name of the Italian element of that operation. This is something that went on throughout Europe under different names in different countries. This is CIA orchestrated bombings and murder and terrorism of European cities and people, killing them and blaming it typically on communists in order to scare the people. That's Operation Gladio, and that is a proven historical fact, and we know about it. There's people in prison as a result of it. Or the fact that the CIA assassinated people, God forbid. Well, that came out in the Church Committee back in the 1970s. Or COINTELPRO, the fact that the FBI could go into your house in what are called black bag jobs and plant evidence against you. Or if you're Martin Luther King and you were to say, yeah, the FBI is actually, behind trying to get me to kill myself, or trying to do other things to destabilize my public career. That would be considered crazy talk and dangerous anti-government extremism because you're sowing a lack of faith in your public institution, the FBI. But guess what? That was true. The Gulf of Tonkin, the covert syphilis injections that went on through the Tuskegee Institute against African Americans and also against Guatemalans, killing many, many people, injecting them with syphilis. To see if you could have different ways of treating it. Lots of people died in those. And if you were to say this back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, you would also be considered a dangerous conspiracy theorist, as how the FBI is putting this today. And, you'd be deplatformed and who knows what else. We can go on and on and on. And, one of the ones that I want to show you, and I want to share the screen. Of course, there's the 2002-2003 domestic, Iraqi weapons of mass destruction and all of those lies. And now back in those days, in 2002, citizens were actually very skeptical of that claim. I was one of them, and there were lots of others. And we were not then being labeled as potential domestic extremists and terrorists, the way I think it's very possible that the FBI might just be inclined to do if it were today. So let me share this one screen with you here. This of course, is from about 5 years ago when Edward Snowden came out with, the massive amount of revelations that happened in 2014. And this is one of them. I mean, probably the most sensational was all the domestic espionage that was going on so massively. NSA spying. In fact, James Clapper, who was then NSA director, lied to Congress shortly before all of these leaks came out and stated, oh, no, we don't do anything like that. Well, yes, you do, and you lied to Congress. But this is one of the Snowden leaks dealing with GCHQ. That's Britain's NSA. And it deals with the dirty tricks that GCHQ has been involved with, including false flags. In this case, false flags against people, but false flags. So in this case, they're recommending against, enemies of the state. Essentially, one thing you can do is write a blog purporting to be one of their victims, and then do other kinds of really nasty harassment, email, text their colleagues, neighbors, and so forth, set up a honey trap. Yeah. This is what in the old days we'd expect from the Soviet Union back in the 60s and 70s, but it's a tried and true method. So GCHQ is involved in that. But yeah, false flags. So when we are getting this document from the FBI, this bulletin, and a lot of these talking heads out there. So if you do a YouTube search or even a Google search on this story, FBI, domestic terrorism, extremism, conspiracy theories, and all of that, you'll find a number of sites that are very critical of that, and you'll find a number of sites that are actually very supportive of that. And I haven't really done a breakdown yet, but it's maybe 50-50 as far as I can tell. And they are basically the ones that support this. You can really see a pattern. It's the ones that have more money, that are clearly more mainstreamy in their presentation and so forth. They're the ones that really are supporting this. And then the ones that are attacking it are usually like lone guys in their house, like me, who are giving you their analysis in that manner. And they're the ones who are opposed to it. But the ones who are supporting it, they are, I think they're kind of missing the point here. And I want to say this as respectfully as I can, because look, I don't want to just be preaching to the choir here. There's a lot of people who have different opinions on this. But the biggest problem I think that they fall under is, as I mentioned before, they conflate extremist ideology with conspiracy theory. And I think this is a really big mistake. So that extremist ideologies, or let us say violent ideologies, that's probably a better way to put it, are not intrinsically related to conspiracies. They may incorporate certain types of conspiracies that they may believe in, all right? But that's a very different thing than saying that they're intimately connected to conspiracy theories. And I'd also point out, and again, I don't have a screen share on this to share with you. I probably should have put it in. But the very phrase conspiracy theory, as far as I can tell, owes its origin to the CIA itself in a document from 1967. I have talked about this elsewhere. I have a video on my YouTube channel that actually talks about this explicitly. How in 1967, the CIA was basically doing a research paper on how to deal with the growing talk in society that the Kennedy assassination was some form of conspiracy, not just Lee Harvey Oswald acting by himself. And this was a problem for this CIA analyst who wrote basically a series of policy recommendations on how to deal with this growing problem. We can't have that. We can't have people believe that there was a conspiracy to kill the president, despite the fact that 80% of Americans to this day believe that there was a conspiracy to kill JFK, and not for frivolous reasons do people believe this. All right, there's been a lot of very excellent research done on this, obviously. Point is, the phrase conspiracy theorist appears, as far as I can tell, to have been coined in that CIA document. And it was coined in such a way, they didn't use the word conspiracy theory, but they talked about conspiracy theorists as a way to smear those individuals who are putting forward alternative narratives to the assassination of JFK. So I think it's fair to say that they coined the phrase conspiracy theory. If that phrase has been used prior to 1967, I would love for one of you to write it in the comments below, because I think we'd all like to see. I have not seen any definitive statement or any research that shows that this is the case. It's possible. I'm not going to deny that it's possible, but I don't think it's the case. And I certainly think it's undeniable that the phrase conspiracy theory only picked up steam culturally and in society after 1967. So I think it's a pretty clear-cut case here where you've got CIA analysts using that phrase and then talking about using their media colleagues and media assets to, put this type of narrative out to basically to kneecap those theorists who had alternate ideas on the Kennedy assassination. So the idea of conspiracy theory itself appears to be a CIA creation as a way to disable alternative narratives to the mainstream. And, the ugly irony here, I'm sure it's not lost on many of you, is that by pointing this out in public, you are liable to be labeled, wait for it, a conspiracy theorist. Like, how ridiculous is that? The other thing that's actually a little bit, I think that would be galling to most people who really think about this is, a lot of analysts, including a lot of mainstream analysts, and including a lot of current and former mainstream media executives, have acknowledged the mainstream media's role in exacerbating cultural tensions in Western nations in general. Like they've talked about this really quite openly, frequently, saying, how the way that they cover news and how they use clickbait and all of these things to kind of get people ramped up and angrier at each other, adding to extremist types of ideologies. Like mainstream media is a huge part of the sickness that we're dealing with. And yet what we're seeing is the establishment media and the establishment power or structure is trying to steer people more and more toward that mainstream media as a way to combat so-called extremism. Like that's a really awful form of irony here. Or is it irony? Or is it a design? Like there's another conspiracy theory, God forbid. So it's just something to keep in mind here. Like they are a huge part of this problem, if not the prime driver of the problem. I think you could make a really good argument that mainstream media is a significant, maybe the most significant cause of the continual ramping up of all of these extremist ideologies that we see on the left and on the right. You can argue that there are other things going on too, but I think certainly the media has a very, very large part to play in all of this. And here we have an FBI document essentially tacitly recommending more control for the mainstream media to combat these extremist conspiracy theories, which are not conspiracy theories, they're just research, which could be correct or incorrect, that lead to certain behaviors. Now, in olden times, pre-9/11, pre-Patriot Act, those long, long ago days that are long gone, we had solutions to problems like this. And the solution was you allow people to have free inquiry, freedom of speech, and you regulate their violent behavior. Like really simple. So you allow people to have free exchange of ideas, no matter how much you may disagree with a certain idea. But when they engage in something that's violent, you say, no, we don't allow that. We're going to incarcerate you or do whatever. So that was the old-fashioned solution. And now what we're seeing more and more is they're just taking more and more slices out of the pie, moving away from behavior into thought itself. And there's the regulation of thought itself. And this is, this particular FBI intelligence bulletin is simply the latest in a long string of these things. And it's probably not even the biggest news story of its kind all year. There's a lot of this stuff going on, but this is a significant development without a doubt. And I want to also, again, I've already mentioned how I think it's disingenuous and also probably mostly wrong to tie extremist ideology to conspiracy theories. I think that's a very weak link and frequently a non-existent link. But I would also point out the very duplicitous nature of this FBI analysis, and where they say, we're not going after your ideas, we're only going after your violent actions. And I would just say, not exactly, FBI. What they're, the whole point of this intelligence bulletin is to warn society and warn the government, presumably, against the dangers of certain types of conspiracy theory in society that need to be, as they suggested in the beginning of that bulletin, more social media and website management and essentially censorship. They don't use that word, but that's really what they're saying, over your thought processes. And I would like to ask the FBI, and I would like to ask you, how is investigating false flags connected to terrorism or violence? How is it connected? All right. Because the answer is it is not connected to violence, and it is not connected to terrorism in any way. There may be a person who's predisposed to violence, and I just got a little message from Tracy. Hey, there's my wife. Hey, Tracy. All right. I just want to get back on my train of thought here. So, false flags, investigating false flags is not in and of itself a violent activity, not in any way, shape, or form, is it? And you show me how it is. There are people who have violent tendencies who might believe in false flags, but you show me the cause and effect. You can't, because there isn't one. So it's a really weak, a very, very weak connection at best. And the fact is, every human being on this planet behaves in accordance with ideas that they have. Right? So we form ideas, and sometimes we act on those ideas, and sometimes we do not. But to implicate an entire area of research, in this case false flags, as worthy of FBI investigation as dangerous conspiracy theories, that's a seriously dangerous thing. Particularly when the FBI in its very bulletin acknowledges that there have been crimes and conspiracies done by governments in the past. And in relating to false flags, I would just point out that the CIA and the United States military both have created memorandums and actual guidelines and playbooks in which they explicitly talk about different forms of propaganda, white, gray, and black propaganda. And the way that they describe black propaganda is essentially as false flags. In other words, you create an action, you blame it on some other party. That's a false flag, right? And they don't rule out, engaging in violent activities, by the way, and blaming it on other parties. This is a long-standing tactic of the United States and certainly of other governments that are able to get away with it. Other governments have a harder time getting away with this stuff because they don't control global media the way that the United States government really does. So the U.S. has way, way more leeway in this type of activity than any other government, including the Russian government. Not that the Russians can't do it. They can. But there is no one who is going to dethrone the United States in the realm of false flags for a long time to come. That's been the case. The U.S. has been the king of false flags for a very, very long time. So analyzing false flags now is seen by the FBI as potentially dangerous terroristic activity, and that should frighten anyone, in my view. How is investigating the New World Order tied to terrorism or violence, or let me put it differently. How is investigating the so-called New World Order a cause in any way of terrorism or of violence? All right. How is researching the fundamental nature of your world as an adult would do, not as a child, but as an adult would do, how is that a cause of terrorism in any way? I guess, when you really get right down to it, there is a danger in researching some of these things. Much as there's a danger in a totalitarian society of researching certain things that are true that government doesn't want you to investigate. So it could be destabilizing for that totalitarian society. Sure, right? And similarly, what we're seeing here is that there are certain things in our society, in Western society, which are not allowed to be discussed any longer. And by researching them and by digging into the truth of them, where you're bumping up against the government, that's definitely not not happy with that and calling that dangerous and possibly potentially terroristically related. And I think this is a very, very extremely dangerous thing to do. I'm going to be close to wrapping this up here. You know, I was going to say we require, but let me just be more careful and say we greatly benefit as a society from full freedom of inquiry. And I mean, you could say we require it. You require it as a healthy, free functioning society. It's been said many times, probably best by Jordan Peterson, in the sense that freedom of speech isn't just like any other freedom. It is a requirement for a fully healthy, functioning society. You need freedom of speech to be able to correct ourselves and to make each other better people. I have ideas, you have ideas, and I benefit from you by hearing your ideas and by you critiquing my ideas and vice versa. And when we can't do that, when we're not allowed to do that, then that's when societies are much more likely to devolve into violence, because conflict never goes away within a society. All right, so you have two ways of resolving conflict. You can either talk it out or you can fight it out. And I think we all realize it's much, much better to talk it out. And so you can only do that from full freedom of speech and full freedom of inquiry. We've got to be able to do that. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to be right all the time when they investigate the latest event that they think is a false flag. People are wrong about that. People are wrong about all kinds of analyses that they have. I've been wrong many times as well, and a lot of the things that I thought were true, and then I had to look at it and I thought, well, maybe it's not true. That's what happens when you're investigating things that are difficult, that are hidden, that you want to get to the bottom of. Sometimes you get wrong turns. That's the price you pay for freedom of inquiry. It's not a crime to be wrong. We need to be allowed to engage in a full freedom of inquiry within this society so that we can make this society better and be corrected when we need to be corrected. But what's happening here is that ideas themselves are getting ever closer to themselves being criminalized. Now, this FBI bulletin doesn't have the force of law. It's simply a bulletin that they've published, and it has its own suggestions, and maybe those suggestions will be taken up by the FBI and other branches of government, or maybe not. Probably yes, at some point. I imagine they will be. What I think we're going to see is not that you will be criminalized for believing such and such a thing, but that you will see the effects in continued social media and platform deplatforming, soft censorship, platform banning, and the like. I think that's really going to be the main outcome of this bulletin. So the ideas themselves are not yet criminalized, but again, we're moving further and further down that road. These things can't happen overnight. So what they need to do is create cultural change, and they're doing it. I mean, this really started, frankly, with the USA Patriot Act of 2001. So that's 18 years ago. A full generation has passed since that occurred. And it started with the Patriot Act, really, I think we could say, and it's continued with a variety of laws through the George W. Bush, through the Barack Obama years, and through the Donald Trump years. It has continued to marginalize ideas that are beyond the mainstream. And we've seen it, whether it's a part of explicit presidential policy or not, it's been happening. So what we're seeing, again, just to final statement on this FBI bulletin really is a not so veiled suggestion of greater web censorship. And I think you should expect more shadow banning, more deplatforming, and the like. It's just, as I said earlier, it's another slice out of the pie. I think what really happened was the internet, late 1980s through the 90s, was something of an unforeseen development. And I mean unforeseen in the sense of all of its massive social repercussions. I don't think this was predictable. I don't think this was foreseeable. I think that what happened is that this digitization of information, the ability to copy and paste around the world, ability then eventually to broadcast around the world, and all of this created a global cultural revolution. It really has happened, so that we're able to share information in ways that were not imaginable for prior generations. And that was an unbelievable outgrowth of freedom. And I mean, really just an incredible thing. And so what happened is that those old controllers of narratives, the establishment media, which existed really unchallenged for generations, found itself challenged, found itself on the back foot, as it were. And it's taken a little bit of time for them to regroup and to figure out, how do we get this under control? And they're getting it under control. So we're seeing the elites. Ask yourself, when we talk about New World Order, if the New World Order really doesn't exist, can anyone please explain what is the purpose of the Bilderberg meetings every single year? Like, what are those all about? They meet once a year in 5-star hotels. They are the true masters of our universe. They've been meeting since 1954. We know actually now what they generally talk about. We've got minutes of the meetings. They've been leaked out. And you've got the most powerful individuals in the world, politically, financially, the movers and the shakers. They get together once a year and they discuss informally, without being elected. Of course, they just discuss the things that they want to do and to get done in this world. And then they go back to the various loci of power and they do their best to make it happen. And they're usually really good at making it happen. So, if it's dangerous to investigate that, which it now, according to the FBI, is almost akin to moving toward terrorism, we've really got some problems here. No one is saying, and I am certainly not saying, that we should just simply allow violent ideologies to go unchallenged. I would never say that, and I don't believe that. All right, but investigation into important events of our world and questioning of authority and the actions of that authority, that's something else. And that is something that is critical for us to continue doing, because we're moving so fast into a new era, technologically, socially, politically, economically, in every way that I can imagine. We are transforming ourselves. And this is a critical moment in our history for people who care to be doing exactly this, to be looking carefully at the structures of power as they exist, and to make sure that we're not getting hosed yet again by the way things are going to be turning out over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So this whole thing is not over. And from both sides, it's not over. So it's not over from the centralized power structure. I think we need to expect more actions like this, more policy statements coming out like this, and slice by slice by slice. I think we can expect these attempts to continue. They're not always successful. And the reason those attempts are not always successful is that you can also expect increasingly more adaptation from the people and from independent researchers as well to get around these restrictions. So in other words, the more difficult it may be for people to broadcast on YouTube, we can expect other platforms to arise, like BitChute, which is definitely arising. And I don't yet have a BitChute channel, but hey, that day will probably come. And content creators are going to BitChute. They're not. I don't think they're able to monetize anything there. But that's really secondary. The main thing is they're able to go there to have a voice. So there's as old avenues close off, hopefully new ones will continue to open up, because that's what people will do. And then those new avenues may themselves get closed off, and we have to continue to adapt. That's the world that we're in. So it's not the end of the world. It's a problem, but I really believe this is a problem that we, as still free and free-thinking people, can deal with. But we have got to be vigilant about this. So I hope that this analysis was useful for you. I tried very hard not to go off in one direction or another and to do too much pontificating here. I wanted to be factual, although clearly my opinions have made themselves known to you. And, you don't have to take my opinion. The information that I'm providing, hopefully, is the most important thing here. But I would again challenge everyone here to question the link, this alleged link between these conspiracy theories and extremist ideologies. In my assessment, I don't see a whole lot, if any, evidence linking the two. So I think really what we're talking about is a straw man argument, largely in relating to these so-called conspiracy theories, which, by the way, are so ill-defined as to be basically meaningless anyway. You know, to talk about an elite that acts illegally on its own for its own benefit as a conspiracy theory, yeah, that's exactly how the world works. So unless the FBI analyst is attempting to refute that, then what they're really saying is that when you conduct an analysis of the structure of power in this world, you're going to be engaging in conspiracy theories, because I can tell you, man, it's an inevitability that you run into the fact that a very small number of people control this much wealth and power. That's our world. It is an unavoidable outcome of doing an analysis of that sort. You're going to come into that. So that's a conspiracy theory, I suppose. And the FBI explicitly made that a big no-no, a potential no-no. And again, my view is they're basically telling social media platforms and websites, yeah, it's cool for you to deplatform those people and to soft ban those people. So there you have it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. I'll be back next week. I'm pretty sure I'll have my wonderful wife, Tracy, back with me. And in the meantime, keep your chin up. Don't get depressed. Remember, all of us have more strength inside us than we ever realize. So this is not the end. Just keep on going. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.